The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Chris, we've got Mike and I hair goals, and how long was the awkward stage for you of growing out your hair? Because you're going to be our role model here.
Yeah, I think, I had it short. I was in the Paris airport, looked at the magazine with this beautiful guy on it, and he was older, and I thought, I could do that. But it was in 2015, so I'm too late to be doing this kind of thing, so I don't know why I did it. And then I still had to do presentations. So it was about 18 months of looking like a televangelist in some form or another. Yeah.
I got 18 months to avoid, people, I guess.
Yes.
I don't know. I guess I just sort of squashed that part of my sensibilities down for a while.
My daughter did the opposite during the pandemic. She shaved everything, and I'm like, and I shaved her for her, and I'm like, you know what? If you want to do it, now's the perfect time. And she's all right.
Yeah,
I'm gonna do it. And
do it.
And,
Stephen,
anyway.
what possessed her? Just like see what it was like?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah,
me too. That was it. Same thing.
That was it. Yeah. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Steven Zagash, joined by Mike Delusky. Did you know that individuals, when they rise to power, it can impair neurological abilities related to empathy? This is a great topic this week. This is just a great topic this week. That's all I'm going to say about that. But
pertinent.
These neurological changes have profound implications for how leaders can connect and inspire and drive impact. So we're going to dive into empathy and leadership from some unique perspectives today and cover some of that. Mike, why don't you tell us a little more about our guests and the incredible work they're doing?
Oh, Stephen, thank you. And super excited. I know our audience today is going to be in for a great show. So our guest today is none other than Chris Jarvis. He's the co-founder of Realized Worth. It's a company that specializes in designing corporate volunteering strategies, training employee volunteer leaders, and implementing company-wide programs to drive social movements. Chris has dedicated his career to helping companies, like Microsoft and SAP connect their employees to meaningful causes that then create a real powerful social movement through their CSRs or their corporate social responsibility program. So in today's episode, we'll explore, as Stephen mentioned, the role of empathy in leadership, including some real fascinating research on the effects of power on the brain and how leaders can maintain their capacity to connect and show compassion. So Chris, welcome to the show. We are super excited to have you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here with you all.
Likewise. Chris, maybe to kick things off, we want to talk a little bit about empathy. Can you share how empathy is, shaped your approach to leadership and the mission that you have at Realized Worth?
Absolutely. Okay, so the whole premise of the name, everything that we do, is based on in some way or another, on empathy. And I should let everybody know, I have a condition called Tourette's. It doesn't always show up, but every once in a while, when there's an audience of Stephen, I assume 10,000 or so, I get a little, it comes out a little bit. So if I stutter or make a weird facial thing, that's what's happening. And that's important for me, for the audience, because they might think that I'm responding negatively to a joke or I don't get something or something like that. So that's out of the way. But my journey. Oh yeah. No, my pleasure. My journey began. I was pretty young. I grew up pretty conservative, and I was involved in the launch of a drop-in center for youth in a small town outside of Toronto, Milton. It's a suburb. And the idea was to make connections with youth before they went in the city. Well, I found I didn't know anything about drop-ins. So I found a couple of guys who did, and they took me on a tour downtown Toronto, and they're walking me all around, and they're introducing me to people they know. One guy had been the executive director of Yonge Street Mission. In the 1800s, there was a mission movement. It was one of the 5 in North America, or 7 or something. It got established. The turn of the century. And then yeah, we were just walking around. They were telling me we were being introduced, and they were, oh, of course, they were trying to, acclimate me to the scene.
Right.
So after about a couple hours of this, they said, "We've been talking. Can we ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And they said, "Well, you have a little church in Milton, and how many families do you have?" I said, "I don't know, maybe 20 different families." 20, it wasn't a huge church. I said, "Do any of them have?" Because I know you both have, kids who are getting older and going to university, and do you have that situation? Right. And I said, yeah, we have some people like that. Okay, so there's this girl, and she's been working on the streets, a working girl. She's in prostitution, and she's 21. She has a couple of little kids. She needs to get her high school education. She wants to get off the street, but she needs a place to live, and she needs somebody to sort of help her with the kids. Now, we'll provide the support, but do you have any of those families have an empty room, take her in for a few months? I thought about it. At that point, do you ever get a question you're not expecting, and you can literally feel your heart coming right up into your throat? I was like, guys,
yeah.
I don't think so. So Mike steps in. He says, "Really? Think harder." And he pokes me in the chest. I said, Mike, I don't think anybody's ready for that. That's pretty extreme. And so he said, "Then what the blank good is your religion to anybody?" Mm. And that was, I could hear something break, and that was the new direction. If what I believed isn't good for everybody, is it good for anybody? And years later, we started Realize Worth.
Oh, yeah. Man. What a transformational story.
Yeah.
Chris, one of the ideas we wanted to discuss today was that concept around how power impacts the brain, specifically that, power can cause kind of a brain damage. Can you walk us through the key findings and why this is such an important issue for leaders to understand?
Yeah, well, the power paradox, I think the article that really, I think, began to surface this came out in 2017, and I have it in the references. The guy's name is Useem, U-S-E-E-M. Anyways, he used a metaphor about how power causes brain damage. And the reason he was able to do that is we can actually watch people who are in positions of power make decision, with functional magnetic imaging. What does the R stand for? MRI, resonance imaging, whatever. We can actually watch people think, and they began to see, oh, okay, these folks have some differences in how they're processing everyday life, and yada, yada, yada. And of course, there's lots of research since then. But yeah, it's widely known colloquially as the power paradox. Once you get it, you're likely a terrible leader. Power.
Well, I think, for me, that's one of the things I realized early on as a leader is that I need to switch things to me being in service to others. And I think that kind of helps with that sort of aspect is just kind of switching the paradigm a little bit of the hierarchy in there to put other people in charge in a way.
Well, okay, that's a good question, Stephen. So servant leadership, that phrase?
Yeah.
It tries to circumvent it. Says, leaders have all this power, but if they're a servant, they'll be fine. But the research suggests that it has nothing to do with your quality or character. It's the hidden bias that clicks in from 200,000 years of evolution that takes you in a certain direction. So it's the position of power in the network that you're probably in a node of power that's working against you, despite your best efforts.
Yeah,
it's not a dead end. Obviously, we're going to get into that, but it's kind of like if you ascend to a high place of power, you're most likely going to start to struggle with normal person brain functions like empathy.
Interesting.
It's pretty amazing, right? I mean, and the idea is just such a compelling concept. I was thinking earlier, when you are rising perhaps to leadership, there's all these qualities that you demonstrate that make you, a thriving, trustworthy individual, right? That people then, want to bestow this power to, and then what sort of got you there isn't going to keep you there. Right. Sort of thing as it sort of erodes away. So my question, Chris, then is what can the leaders do to, number one, I guess, recognize it? And then how do they counteract those effects?
Well, the first thing I think, is for people to begin to think, yeah, not me though. Right? Like we're all the heroes in our own story. Even Putin is a hero in his own story. Everybody is a hero in their story, doing the right things for the right reasons. And typically, if you bring a bit of identity theory into this, leaders are individuals who are known enough in the network. So they have enough strong ties, weak ties, connections in a network. They have enough weak tie awareness and enough strong tie connection to other nodes of power that you almost fall into it. But the thing that has to happen first is the group has to collectively agree on a direction. Leaders tend to rise up after the group is moving in a certain direction. Think of the American colonies and breaking away from Britain. It was well established in the colonies that this is what everyone wanted to do. And then you have a voice. You have somebody giving voice to it. And identity theory says if that person looks enough like us and represents enough of my point of view, I will give them my power to represent all of us, because it is confusing to listen to 10 million people at the same time. But if you have someone who can articulate it and holds the qualities that we all think are kind of cool, that's our prototypical leader. So anybody who is prototypically identified as a leader of a large group of people, the group of people would say his behaviors are probably reflective of what I really want to do or would do if I could.
Interesting.
So you've worked with some of the world's biggest companies. Have you seen like this empathy deficit play out in corporate cultures, and how can like organizations address it in a systemic kind of manner?
Well, I think we also played on the 20th with the inauguration and the who's who of the new oligarchy. So a small group of people have most of the power and resources now. And a large part of the collective group said, you know what, that's okay with us, because that's kind of what we would do or what we think. Now, here's the bad part of all of this is the majority of our decisions are just reactions to our environment. Because of the way our brains work, we try to automate everything. So have either of you read Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow?
Parts of it. Yep.
Yeah. Well, the whole idea, the gentleman who wrote it, oh my gosh, I'm live and I can't remember the guy's name. In the comments, if somebody wants to put the name, especially you, Michelle, if you want to put that name in, so I don't look really dumb and I can mention it quick now. Okay, so he writes this book based on a bunch of this research, and now it's probably the most widely accepted framework for understanding at this point in our understanding of how humans think. And so 80 to 90% of our decisions are just reactions to our environment. It's actually closer to 95%. That 5% are system 2 thinking, which is slower and more considered, justifies. Why'd you do that? Well, I was hungry. No. There were 15 environmental cues, and my brain ran a prediction of, in this situation with those cues, this is going to be your reaction. So I run a prediction of what the right activity is, and then the part of my brain that notices that comes online. So I'm noticing what I'm doing, rationalizing it after, but my brain plays a little trick so it feels like I made the decision. It's very rare we are making intentional decisions that we're not being forced to make by our environment.
So we got to, what was that? Daniel Kahneman was the author of that?
Daniel Kahneman, yes, thank you, Michelle. You win the free iPad that Zero Company gives out after each webinar. Congratulations.
Awesome. I love it.
So we've got a question from YouTube. So let's see. I've seen firsthand leaders who were in self-managed organizations based on equivalence move into command and control companies and become megalomaniacs. Why are boards and investors not aware?
They're totally aware. Who do you think's on boards, and then who do you think are the investors? They're totally aware. You understand the game. But the thing is, the other part, and this is the bad part of empathy. So empathy is an amazing concept. It's an amazing evolutionary thing that's based basically on the research of David Eagleman and Lasana Harris and a few others, that it's tied to our main pain matrix. So when we feel pain, it lights up through our brain, and they call that the pain matrix. It's not localized in any one place. So every part of your thinking process is like, oh, this is not good. And there are two reactions. One is remove yourself to stop the pain, or intervene to actually stop the pain. Like I have agency, I can stop the pain. If I can't stop the pain, maybe I remove myself. So we're seeing stuff around the world. California and the fires, I couldn't do anything. So eventually, a couple of times, I just had to be like, I can't watch. So aversion or intervention, those are two things. Yeah. Now, empathy, this has kept us alive as a species, because why would I risk life and limb for somebody I don't know? If I'm feeling their pain and I can stop it, I will intervene. That's why humans help humans. It's wired right into how we experience pain and pleasure. We won't talk about the pleasure side, but it stops at your in-group. So whoever I think looks like me, talks like me, shared background, shared gender, shared school for Americans, weirdly, is a big identifier. You can do it. You can divide a group of people and turn them on each other based on blue eyes and brown eyes. That was actually a bit of research done in California. So with little kids right after World War II, it is really easy to manipulate humans, and propaganda plugs into your neural net and dials down the humanity of the outgroup. So empathy is great for stepping in to help your own. But where you hit that line, there's an automatic dehumanization that happens, which has allowed us to do horrible, unthinkable, unspeakable things to other humans, and then go home and hold our baby and think that we're the most wonderful person. It dehumanizes them. If we thought they were human, we would not be able to do it because we'd feel the pain. So when you get to extreme levels of power, you other the very group of people who give you the power to be there in the first place. And then, it's going to hurt a million people. We'll get over it. Well, we won't, but they will, because they're not really my problem. You know what I mean? So the reason you get to that level with your C-suite and board and other people with often extreme amounts of power, and why they don't call each other on it, is because they don't see it either. You're in a bubble.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I mean, and part of growing as people, we lose some of that ego, and it's building that we're getting a wider perspective on people, and so we can our group around us starts to expand, and that's hopefully where your empathy is expanding. But yeah,
that's a good point, Stephen, because in physics, entropy, second law of thermodynamics, works in a closed system. Everything breaks down, falls apart, blah, blah. As long as you're in a bubble in a closed system, entropy is crucifying your functions in your brain. If you open it up and keep bringing in new people and challenging your brain through neuroplasticity, you can extend your empathy, and you can stave off that bubble mindset where you become irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, the brain is an amazing thing. I was just, before we jump to another topic, I was just doing a little bit of reading the other day on the halo effect, right? Which I think most are familiar. This is a bias that we have. Like you were saying, thinking fast. We think very quickly and build impressions, on people based on this halo effect, and depending on certain things that we've experienced in our life, whether it's good or it's bad, and we very quickly will, and then we end up making a lot of bad judgments off of for example, something like the halo effect. So just, and I love your point there about bringing in other forms of thinking, other individuals into the circle to be able to affect that neuroplasticity, as you mentioned. One of the things I wanted to maybe jump to next, Chris, was how empathy could be the catalyst for some of the changes that organizations and people can make. So I'm curious, with your work that you've done at Realized Worth, that focuses really on driving some of those social movements within these companies. Which it's funny, right? When you think of the word, company, and you're talking about like that closed circle, a company could very much, be like that, when this group of people all sort of doing the same thing, focused on the same thing, don't change, very much, could become kind of like that closed system. I'm sort of curious, like, how does empathy act as maybe this catalyst for inspiring employees to engage?
It's because it causes disruption. Humans hate cognitive dissonance. Hate it. if Mike, I could point out that you are not who you say you are right here on this call, I could probably ruin your life. If I did it and we were friends and I did it publicly, you may do yourself harm. It is enormous. And that's a big part of propaganda. The way I got caught up in that last statement because it's just say the last part of the question again, Mike. I'm
No,
very unprofessional participant in this podcast.
No. It's it's a big topic, right? Yeah. It's a very big topic, and we can go in a bunch of different directions. So the point was essentially like, how does empathy act as that catalyst essentially to inspire the employees then to kind of break away from what they're doing and engage with the initiatives that the company wants to.
That's what it was. And I think we're seeing a number of companies. So companies can't have empathy, right? People have empathy, but companies can't have empathy, which is why you can have, I think it was like $100 billion that was promised after George Floyd, and only $1.5 billion were actually expended. The rest, they all just walked back from. Other companies have made hundreds of millions in DEI investments and just thought, you know what? No. So companies operate on a system that exists in our heads, right? So if we believe a company's worth something, it's worth something. If we don't, we don't. So it's this human giving it reality. But if there are enough humans inside of a group, an identifiable group, not Microsoft or LinkedIn or Apple, whatever, if there's enough humans that have that shared identity that start to think differently because of the cognitive dissonance that we can't be this person, so we need to do something else, that will eventually disrupt the entire system. Because by that point, not so much in a company, but definitely in countries, usually leaders, when they get to the point of leading through legislation and big carrots and sticks, they've lost the mandate to actually represent the broader consensus. And so they're just holding on to power. And I think companies go through that a little bit. We're seeing some of that now, where the people who work there are going to start experiencing more and more of this dissonance. So my job is to make more of that happen. And the reason we do that, we're very disruptive. We take people and introduce them to people that are not like them, and then show they are actually like you. And that's disruptive. Right now, probably today, there'll be 10 million Americans walking around with cognitive dissonance because they're talking one-on-one with dozens of Chinese individuals, and nothing is lining up. Nothing is lining up. There is a crack happening right now in this consensus of belief in the United States that it will be interesting, I think is a safe way to say it. Watch it play out.
Because if I'm thinking about it correctly, right, the whole thought behind the cognitive dissonance is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you sort of resolve it one of two ways, right? Either avoidance, or if there's the conflicting information, you just sort of ignore that. Or I guess maybe what you're talking about is individuals, increasing, I guess, their mindfulness of that voice or that situation, and kind of even changing their attitude towards it. Is that right?
Yeah. And so, Mike, you have 2 kids?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So in those moments, our neuroplasticity, when you're confronted with a situation where you have to decide what it means. So your reticular core is sending a message, pounding on your medial prefrontal cortex here. And this is where you decide what it means. So it's either going to fire up your amygdala or other things. You're going to remember it a certain way, whatever. There's a whole bunch of things going on. When you have a baby, lots and lots of meaning making. Your brain secretes acetylcholine, and I think that's the right pronunciation, and your brain becomes plastic. You'll grow new neural pathways to now deal with the reality of your environment, which is, oh my gosh, I'm a dad. This person could die if I don't look after them. What does this mean? Because this whole social thing, there's a primary partner thing, there's a whole bunch of things. You will never live the rest of your life as though that didn't happen. That has changed you fundamentally, because there's a physiological, we could take a picture at the change in your brain. If people have big events like that, anybody living in Gaza, neuroplasticity. What does this mean? What does this mean? It's crisis, it's trauma. But trauma, it could also be something wonderful, like I got married or I fell in love, or it could be someone died. These are all things that affect us kind of permanently. We learn to deal with it, but it permanently affects us. Or we can have small continual events that over time can do the same thing. And so going to volunteer with people who are not like me, who have nothing to offer, and exploring our shared humanity, I've got to resolve that dissonance. And if I go 20 times during a year, in all likelihood, I am fundamentally changed for the rest of my life. This is like me, when Mike poked me in the chest and said, does your religion actually help anybody? New direction for the rest of my life. And that's really what we're trying to do with people. And if enough people have that shared experience and can talk about it with each other, eventually the culture of the company or nation will shift and leaders will arise that represent that view versus the older view from the previous generations.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know if you watched that show Severance. That's the second season's coming out, but it's...
Dude, I wrote a whole blog using Severance and Silo.
All right, give me a brief, couple sentences.
No, I want to hear what you're going to say. I want to hear what you're going to say. I've been talking too much, although I guess you invited me. Whatever.
All right, yeah, we'll come back to that at some point. No, what I'm just thinking though is this tragedy of lack of meaning in people's work, and to the point where like they're in, you're going in, you're punching the clock, and it's just the same thing over and over again, right? And to the point where it's just this, mind-numbing, open up the vein to the corporate machine thing every day, and people just want to cut ties with that as much as possible. But I think where business is really going, where the future will be going, is trying to create more lasting and meaningful events at work where we can get more meaning out of what we're doing. And you deal with that like all the time, right? As far as, do you see that sort of severance shift of a company that's, sort of just like that, to where, hey, I want to add some soul to this machine?
The show Severance is interesting because you can, in the article I'm writing, I use it to sort of, again, this Xiao Hong, still learning Mandarin, talking to different countries, but also the idea of meaning is interesting because sometimes we'll talk about, I want to find more meaning in my work. We might find our purpose, right? An external thing. We're like, oh, that's me. I'm going to hang my shingle on that. Meaning, you make it. Nothing means anything objectively. You're either going to believe what somebody else says it means, or you're going to make it mean something else. And it has to do with how memory works in the human brain. So these are, I nerd out on neuroscience. It is way above my pay grade. So, but apparently our neural network, first, nobody else has one like you, Stephen. Nobody can think like you, Mike. It's as unique as your thumbprint, if not more. Also, all of the information in the universe, if you could measure everything, look at everything, think of everything, every molecule, everything, your neural net has enough synaptic pathways and neurons to hold all of that information if it came to you like a computer, like a list. That's not how we think. We think contextually. A computer is connected to a million things in my mind, right? It's connected to when I was a kid and I got my first one. It's connected to work. It's connected to shows. It's connected to women who were named computers in World War II. It's connected to all of these different things. It's the network of ideas that limits what we can know. So, gosh, the first part of the question again.
We were talking about severance a little bit.
Severance. Okay. Yeah. So it's not about, for me anyways, it's not about finding meaning at work. The first question is, why is your work not meaningful? Because you're going to make the meaning. You're going to assign a meaning to it. And I think what we're saying is, I have assigned a meaning to it. And much like Severance, it's awful. Like, it's just brutal. It's invent a robot for this. Like, I do not like my job. I get nothing out of it. So this is the meaning we're making and we bring to it. So people like B. Bucklandro and others try to think about how to engineer workspaces so that people can see the meaning more regularly. But in our work, we actually use a methodology, usually around employee volunteering, to try and show people that it's actually you making the meaning. But to make accurate meaning, you have to be aware of who you are and your bias, maybe what's actually going on around. Like, we don't know enough about everything to properly make meaning sometimes. So I would say the thing that can be done is we should show people, and I don't know if it's a private sector's job to do this, but humans, if they knew more about how we make meaning, we would have more agency over how we feel about things. Otherwise, you have to go with people like me, and I will bring you to an immersive experience where the meaning is almost impossible to ignore, because I do framing, I fill in the blanks, I ask you at the end, what did you experience? Was what you expected, to try and bring that cognitive dissonance back. And that helps a lot, because people still decide their own meaning, obviously, but they've got enough information to make a proper evaluation. The workplace, like my job in a desk, and nobody's doing that. Nobody's sitting down and saying, hey, let's see what this means here. It's like, here's what I need, and here's how much. It's so transactional. There's not room for it in the current capitalist system, really, most jobs.
If you mentioned kind of like my personal higher purpose, and then maybe a company can really articulate their purpose really well, do you ever try and marry these purposes together to produce?
Yeah, and that's where you get into things like, well, what do we do well as a company? At McDonald's, they make fast food, but they're actually great at logistics, moving lots of stuff and people and food around the world. If you had enough of the population to say, this is our identity, this is what we're good at, how can we use what we're good at to improve this situation or address this social group or this environmental issue, then you start to get much closer to, oh, I see what we're doing here and how that can help the world. And you can stitch those things together. So while I may not like everything about my job, at least I have a big picture of how it is meaningful to me, not to you, but it's meaningful to me for these reasons. And it needs to be intrinsic. But humans don't typically find that on their own, unless you have this moment.
Interesting.
So, Chris, I'm curious if we can give maybe the audience, some tools or based off of your experience. So, because you were starting to get into, I think, some of the work that you do, and I'm sure you encounter barriers to even leaders or employees embracing empathy, right?
Yeah.
So how do you help? How do you help them overcome that barrier of embracing empathy?
It needs an experience. So you can't talk people into it. You can't think your way into it. I cannot read an article and become more empathetic. I need unless it's sensual, immersive sensorially. Stories can trigger it, but that's probably because I'm in my mind making it. I'm imbuing it with a ton of meaning that's quite powerful. Because I know I can watch a movie with somebody else and they are just like, this is the worst bit of drivel ever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so changed my life. What are you talking about? So, it's kind of up to the person how it's received. But you need an experience. So if you can find an opportunity to have an experience in an area with which you are unfamiliar, could be skydiving, could be going to volunteer at just some level of unfamiliarity, you can trigger neuroplasticity. Travel is a good way to do it. That's why they say travel helps stave off dementia, because dementia happens when our brains start to coalesce around a small group of ideas that gets smaller and tighter, and we love confirmation bias because we hate cognitive dissonance, and we're sitting in front of a news show 24 hours a day. Yeah, I knew I was right. Yeah, I knew I was right. Yeah, I knew. It's a dopamine. You're addicted to dopamine at that point, and your brain is so small and so cut off. Empathy is hardly ever happening for anybody out of your immediate circle. So we need, as humans, to intentionally put ourselves in the new somehow.
So for leaders, I was going to say, for leaders, is that what they should be? And especially like in business, is that what they should be looking for? Is like pursuing more experiences to open things up for people in that way, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's kind of a couple things. It's leaders have the bubble problem, and leaders have most people are just going to say what I think because I have power. And leaders are at this point leaning towards more narcissistic type thinking patterns, which means Where I might think, really, Stephen, you think that? I don't know. At this point, I'm thinking, that makes sense. I'm great. You're right. This is right. We're beautiful. Let's keep going, kind of thing. It doesn't mean they have problem-free lives or anything like that. But I do mean you need to surround yourself with somebody who's going to disagree, even if you want to kill them. You need to surround yourself with people who are willing to lock arms in solidarity towards a more pro-social future, because ultimately, I think that's all I care about in this conversation. I don't care if you make more money, but you could use it that way too. And then you need to actually put yourself in places that challenge comfort. You need to feel unsure, because that means that there's a good chance that neuroplasticity is happening, because growing new neural pathways is physically painful. We don't register it as pain in our conscious self, but it is a painful process. And we go through denial, anger, frustration, all of those kinds of things until we start to come out of it. We move from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent to unconsciously incompetent to consciously competent. That's the learning matrix. For anybody on the call who knows it better than me, I apologize for messing that up. But there's this process that you've just got to go through, whether it's learning a language, learning a piano, there is this learning process where you need to take a lot in. And that's what leaders need to do. They need to be intentional about, McKinsey used to famously say, they demand in their meetings that somebody disagree with them. In consulting, the consulting firm McKinsey, although I don't know if it actually happens, but it's the right idea. Also, new situations, you need to be in new situations. So people disagree, new situations, and then people who you would say, yeah, we're in this together and I can count on them. Somebody you can work things out with and say, what's your take that you trust? I think those things are key.
Yeah. You want kind of like agitation, right? Is that a little bit, is kind of the word I always think of, is agitation and building kind of this froth of stuff going on. Just, and I think, evolution and stuff, it's always about some sort of friction almost, in a way, where something's just, not comfortable and you find a better way. Yeah.
That's it. If you reach a point in life and you think, I kind of got all figured out, my friends are telling me, you're in deep trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
I like that, Mike. Before we go to our last questions here, you got any other question you want to dive into, Mike?
Yeah, there's a lot that we get into. I was just, maybe I did want to ask the measurements or the metrics question, because I think sometimes in business we tend to be so numbers oriented, but I love this point that maybe there are some signs. So it's not just a number, but maybe some signs that you're starting to see movement. So Chris, I was curious, what metrics or signs can be put in place, or should people be on the lookout for if they're starting to create this impact, if they're starting to see the movement?
Right. It's a great question. So we usually use a theory of change or a logic model in our work with the companies. So let's say when we were working with Microsoft or Apple or whatever. So you identify your key activities for the project, employee volunteering, your key resources, T-shirts, right? A whole bunch of other things, places to go volunteer. And then you have your outputs. How many people, how many places, how many hours, how much money, how much do we get done, how many walls do we paint? And that goes in your ESG report or your CSR report. Mm-hmm. And outputs are important and they are indicators, but they're not the point. The point is your set of outcomes. How are employees benefiting? How is the community benefiting? How is the company benefiting? And we always like to say, can you take a picture of it? Like, people are more giving. Awesome. Show me. Where are you seeing this giving? Like, the outcome is a more generous place. Well, let's go find the indicator of that. And then long-term impact is, how's the world better that we did all of this stuff? So there has to be resources, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. And the kind of outcomes and impact are going to be a little bit more qualitative. But I like this. So this is a little quote I had written down. Authentic impact is about genuine connection and creating lasting change, not just hitting targets. When the measure becomes the metric, it's no longer useful. So if I'm just hitting numbers around giving, I don't even know if it's an indicator of anything, because full stop, I can't see anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But Mike, I do want to throw in that our CSR managers usually know a whole lot more than the people giving them the directives at the C-suite, because of this power problem, right? And because of a lack of experience. Not always, but often.
It's good that they recognize it.
Well, the CSR managers do. I've yet to meet a senior leader who would say, "Oh, yeah, that is my problem."
Chris, great conversation. Before we wrap up a little bit, I like to ask this one question. Maybe I'll change it just a little bit. So, what role do you think love plays in business or in systems in general?
None.
How so?
Business systems there's no place for love. There's no place for love in my strategy and my long-term outcome. It's never going to show up in outputs, outcomes, or impact. It does not belong. I'm actually surprised that charitable enterprise at all has been taken on by the private sector, because they don't have to, right? Plus, the business system can't have empathy. So systems emanate from us. If we all decided we no longer believed in someone else is the right person to be in power or some way of doing things, it shifts. That's why we left feudalism and ended up here. I mean, eventually things change because we think it's different. We think ourselves into something different. So love, that connection, that authentic, empathetic, understanding, compassionate, caring, concerned connection with other humans can change business systems, but love will never sit inside of a business or operational system.
Just because of the nature, you're saying, of like one being subjective and one being objective, where it's more of just a system? Or what about, the joining of those two together? You're saying just purely because it's the subjective nature, it will never be in the objective.
Right. Like there's the law can't offer justice. Humans demand justice. The law demands fidelity to the written code. If you want to change the code, change the code. But I don't care how this plays out in your life. That's the law, which is why you could follow the law and throw people in Auschwitz in Germany. I'm a good upstanding citizen. I follow the law. That's not justice. So the law is almost always against justice. So these concepts of humanity live within humans. But if we let go of them for one reason or another, and mostly it happens because we're afraid, and we're afraid of those people. It's almost always through human history. You know what our problem is? Those people. They're taking our stuff. They're threatening our stuff. They're going to get our stuff. This is like, we should have left that behind in caveman days, but we bring it forward and we still act on it. So love is the antidote to that. But the only way to get that is to experience with the other, which is something we are reluctant to do.
We haven't talked about this, but do you have any thoughts about the emergence of AI and how it's going to play a role?
I love the topic of AI and what it means and how it could go good or bad. But yeah, I would love to talk about it. But
do we need to build love into the AI?
That would be an impossibility. But you can understand what the AI is. Everybody says, well, this is biased. Well, it's biased because it was written by humans. But the good thing is I throw an email in or an article in, I say, show me my bias. And it does. So it can be biased, but also understands bias. So there are ways to work with the AI if we're thoughtful enough to get us where we want to go.
All right. We're at time. We could.
That's going to be another show.
Yeah. I'm up for it.
I know. It was like Chris, before we go, where should people go to check out you or your work online?
So the future doesn't happen to us. It's something we make based on all the things we just talked about. We want more love in it. We need to do that hard work. So we just launched our makerspace as part of the RW Institute. Love to have you come and explore how you can join us making a more pro-social future. It's rw.institute.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you, Chris.
rw.institute.
Yes, and thank you to our guests today for tuning in. And be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.